today we're going to be looking at a new sermon series just called the messy process of spiritual growth, and kind of how we grow spiritually and how it's kind of a messy process that we go through. And the thing about it is this, we live in a world today where we have answers for everything that we're looking for. So if you go into a bookstore, if you do what I do, which is electronic stores, you will find like self-help books or how-to books, and there's just thousands of them. And so one of the actual ones that you might be familiar with is have you heard of the Complete Idiot Guide books? Have you heard of those? And how many of you have a book at home of a Complete Idiot Guide of some kind? Raise your hand. Only a few of us? Okay, but these are what they look like. You see here, so this one was written by me. As you can tell, that's me on there. It's about football, so I can help you understand football. And so I published that one a decade ago. It's been a bestseller nationwide. And so that is my how-to book on football. Now, I just put my photo on there. But anyways, those are the idiot guides. And so you can find these books on all sorts of issues. So here's just some I found. You can get an idiot guide on getting out of debt, okay? You can get one on making a success or having a successful job interview, how to make smoothies. So you can get an idiot guide on how to make smoothies, how to coach youth basketball, how to play the game of soccer, how to protect your 401k and your IRAs, how to buy and sell a home. You can get some on how to play a guitar, how to create a perfect resume, how to build a website, how to be a new dad and what that means. And I'd love to see that book of telling you how to be a new dad, because that'd be interesting to see what they say. There's this one, how to manage a visit from your in-laws. Okay? The Idiot's Guide on how to manage a visit from your in-laws. And there are actually 730 of these books that have been made on different topics. If you want some of the more creative ones, here are 4 of the more creative ones. How to speak cat. The Idiot's Guide to How to Speak cat. No idea what that book would have, but I thought about buying it because I was like, I'm just interested. Okay, there's this one. How to be the Pope. Okay, Idiot's Guide on How to be the Pope. How to avoid huge shifts. I don't even know what the Idiot's Guide on How to Avoid Huge Shifts. I don't even know what that means, but you can get an Idiot's Guide on it. And the next one is this, Idiot's Guide on How to Start Your Own Country. Son, that might be yours right there. How to start your own country, develop your own dictatorship. And there's this last one, how to defeat your own clone. You might need that one. So these are actually ones that you can go get. Here's the point. We have how-to books and resources on just about everything in life that we can just kind of follow a set plan. If we get this book, we can follow the set plan in it, and we will find success in whatever we're attempting to do at that moment. And the thing about it is this, we want the same thing for our spiritual lives, okay? The church has always tried to attempt to give us kind of a one-size-fits-all process to help us grow spiritually, to be successful in our spiritual lives. And if you're like me, you've tried to follow it before, and you have failed time and time again. So in like my case, I want to be a godly person, yet when I look back at my life, I see a lot of mistakes and failures that I've had in my past as being a follower of Christ. I've had some successes and times where I felt like I was close to God, and I can also look back and I can see a lot of times where I was a failure, and where I felt like God was nowhere to be found and he was far away from me. And that's kind of my story as I look back. And because of that, I've always looked for kind of some perfect plan that if I just had it all laid out for me, I could find continual success in my spiritual walk and my spiritual. So I've always looked for that. But here's what I have found. The simple truth is this. It's just not that simple. Okay, spiritual growth is not that simple. There is no complete idiot's guide that can provide you a perfect path to spiritual growth that you go, this is how it works, and it works every time. There is no idiot's guide to that makes it that simple. What I've discovered is this, that true spiritual growth is actually a very messy process, and it's filled with success, and it's filled with failures time and time again. There is no one-size-fits-all plan for just all of us. It's different for everyone. And the reason for that is simply this. We're all different people, okay? We have different gifts. We have different talents. We have different likes. We have different experiences that we have in our life. We have different traumas. We have different personalities. We have different temptations. We are are vastly different from each other. So why would we assume that spiritual growth is different from that and that one size fits all? It doesn't. There is no identical plan for all of us at this point. So what you will see as you go through the Bible is spiritual growth and progress is a very messy business. And you will see this from some of the finest people of the scriptures that we talk about fairly regularly. Let me just give you some examples this morning so you get an idea that spiritual growth and progress in your life and maturity in your life, it takes time, it's messy, there's ups, there's downs, and that's how it's always been. One example is this. There's a man named Elijah. If you know who Elijah is, you find him in 1 Kings primarily, but in 1 Kings chapter 19, he is a prophet of God. And at this stage in his life, Israel has really shifted away from God, and they're worshiping pagan gods and doing their own thing, and they've kind of forgotten God in the background. And he's getting upset by this, and he's feeling defeated by this. And so at one point, he just kind of snaps, and he confronts the king, and he says, "King, go get your other prophets of these other gods, and let's go have a showdown to see whose God is real." And it's called Mount Carmel, the showdown on Mount Carmel. And what you have, long story short, you have Elijah, the one prophet of God, and 850 other prophets show up to these other gods, or claimed gods. And they show up on this hillside, and the entire assembly of Israel comes before them down in the plains to watch this. And Elijah just basically goes up and goes, "Well, both build altars, and we'll see whose God will burn up the offerings that we put on these altars." Okay? And so he gives these 850 prophets of Baal all day long to pray to their gods and stuff, to light this thing on fire and to serve up their offering to him. And it says they get to the point where they even start cutting themselves midday because nothing's happening. And so they're cutting themselves and slicing themselves, and they're doing all this stuff, and they get done and nothing happens. And Elijah then goes, he gets these guys, and he gets a bunch of water, and he has them bring back water, and he pours pitchers of water all over the offering. It says it's kind of overflowing, the trench around it. And then he says a prayer, and his prayer is just basically, "God, show these people you're the God." And it says out of the sky, fire comes down, and it takes out his entire offering, and burns everything to the ground. And it says everybody just bows. And Elijah at that point says, "Get all those prophets and take them away." And they get all the prophets and they take them away. And what you have is you have this incredible picture of this guy Elijah on a high. Like, if you can imagine that you're one against 850, God just shows himself to the entire community. You'd have to be sitting there as a guy and be like, "That was the sweetest moment of my life." Okay, that was fantastic. And you'd be like, "Thank you, God. That was the greatest thing ever." Here's what's interesting. You go one chapter over from that whole event. So this is within hours of that whole thing going on, and here's what you read. Then this is Elijah, then he went alone into the wilderness after this huge event. Traveling all day, he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died." Is that not amazing? This guy goes from this high. Several hours later, he's sitting there going, "God, just take me. I'm so done with this whole thing. I'm so tired of this stuff. I'm no better than anyone else. I've accomplished no more than anyone else has." And you have a guy in full depression. And you look at that and go, that's amazing, the two different places he is in a very short time. And I think it's a good illustration of your spiritual growth, your spiritual walk, that you have highs and you have lows, and sometimes they're pretty close to each other. And you see that from Elijah. Another example, John the Baptist. John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, he baptizes Jesus. When he is arrested later on in his life, he's arrested, and it reads this in Luke chapter 7. It says, "The disciples of John the Baptist told John about everything Jesus was doing," because he's arrested, he can't get out to see what's going on. So he's hearing reports of what Jesus is doing in society and in the community. And it says, "So John called two of his disciples, and he sent them to the Lord to ask him, 'Are you the Messiah we've been expecting, or should we be looking for someone else?'" Let me tell you why this is crazy. John had baptized Jesus. At his baptism, he heard the voice of God, and he saw the Holy Spirit descend. And he saw the Son, Jesus, there. He saw all parts of the Trinity at one instance. It was his cousin. He knew him intimately well and knew who he was. And yet at this point in his life, he's going, "Hey guys, go ask him if he's actually the Messiah or if I should be waiting for someone else." Crazy. It's crazy to think about because it's John the Baptist and he's having these doubts. The disciples, here's a couple of good ones. You have Jesus' 12 picked disciples. You would think, great guys. They're spiritual guys. They got this all together. In Luke chapter 9, we read this. The disciples are hanging out. Verse 46, it says, then his disciples began arguing about which of them was the greatest. So they're walking along, and in the background, they start having a debate. And Jesus hears them, and they're all like, no, I'm better than you. No, I'm better. He likes me better than he likes you. I'm the greatest. I'm the greatest. And they start having this thing, and it says Jesus, like, chastises them. It says, like, guys, you need to learn what it means to be the greatest, okay? And then he goes into some teaching. If you go further in that chapter, literally 8 verses later, what happens is they continue their walk. So they're first arguing about who's the greatest. Jesus tells them, shut up, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Here's how you determine the greatest in the kingdom of God. And then they go into this town, a Samaritan town, which Samaritans and Jews had conflicts, so they weren't people that got along. But they go into a Samaritan town, and they don't treat them the best when they get there, and they're not really wanting Jesus to stick around. And so here's what the disciples say in verses 54 and 55. When James and John saw this, how they were treating Jesus and them as a group, they said to Jesus, Lord, should we call down fire from heaven and burn them up? And Jesus turned around and rebuked them. So you have James and John go, they're not treating us well. Can we kill them all? Can we call down fire from heaven and have them all obliterated? Can we do that, Jesus? And he's like, you idiots. What are you talking about? Okay? And you see these highs and lows from these people. Noah, here's another one. Noah, the one guy that God chooses to save through the flood, and his kids. You have Noah, who's referred to as blameless and righteous before the flood, and that's why God picks him as the guy that he's going to put on the ark to save humanity, okay? What you find is after the flood, the waters go down. It says he starts cultivating the ground again, and here's the account we see in Genesis chapter 9. It says after the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine that he had made, and he became drunk, and he laid naked inside his tent. And so he drinks himself till he blacks out. And so in his tent, if you read the story in between these scriptures I'm going to give you, his 2 sons go walking into his tent. Hey, Dad. And they're like, oh, Dad. And they walk out, and it says they go in backwards so they don't see his nakedness, and they cover him with a blanket. And then he wakes up later realizing what's been done, and his sons have seen him naked because he blacked out in his tent. And it says this, when Noah woke up from his stupor, okay, so he's got a hangover, and he says he learned of what Ham had done, his youngest son had done. And then he gets ticked off at him, like, how dare you guys do this? And he goes into the whole thing, tearing them apart because they saw him naked. And you're like, maybe if you weren't getting drunk, no one passing out on the ground, people wouldn't see you naked. Okay, there's a solution to this issue. And so you see this again of a guy that's having these ups and downs. They're not the people we always make them out to be. It was a messy process for them. The last one I want to give you is Solomon, who we just extensively covered in our last series. But you have Solomon in the first part of his book in verses 12 through 14, if you remember, he says this, I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God had dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed that everything going on under the sun, and really it is all meaningless, like chasing after the wind, or what's the word? Hevel. Remember? Okay, good thing you got that. Okay. Or Hevel, where he just goes, everything's meaningless. And so you have this guy that knows the Lord, and then he's going, I looked at everything in the world, and it's just meaningless. I can't find value in any of it. And you're going, this is a messy process. I could go on and on and on with biblical examples. But what we clearly see is this. The greatest people found in the pages of the Bible had a messy spiritual process of growth that I think all of us can relate to. That we go, yeah, I'm familiar with that, the ups and downs and the backs and forths. The best illustration that I could think of this week of how to understand the process of spiritual growth was learning how to ride a bike. And so let me just tell you some of the keys of learning how to ride a bike if you want to learn how to ride a bike. And real quick, how many of you can actually ride a bike? See, if you ask the younger generation and you ask them, I bet you less than 50% of them can because they just don't ride them anymore. You can't. I taught him, and then he never wanted to do it, and so he never built on it, but I gave him all the skills. He just chose not to implement them in his life. But here's how you learn to ride a bike. There's 5 things I looked at that you go, these are kind of keys to learn to ride a bike. The first thing is this, you have to trust your mom and dad that they're not going to let you die. Okay, so when you're first learning to ride a bike, you see this all the time with little kids. Now they put the helmets on and stuff, and like, well, we never had that stuff in our generation, right? they just stuck you on the bike, and it was like, let's go. But the first thing you have to trust is if it's your dad or your mom, they're not going to let you get killed. So you kind of go into it with that trust going, this is something new, this is kind of scary, but I know they're not going to let me die. And that's kind of key, is you have to trust that in your parents. The second thing you have to have is the right situation, which is if you're going to learn how to ride a bike, they don't put you on a hill and be like, hop on, and we're going to put you down the hill, okay? You're looking for a right situation where you get a flat surface, something that doesn't have a lot of gravel. You're not going to put them in mud. You're going to find a flat surface, hopefully concrete or something, and let them learn how to ride on that. So you're finding the right situation. The next thing is this. You have to learn. You have to get up every time you fall down. Okay, that's the key. Every time you fall down, get back up. This is where I struggle with my kids. They would fall down and be like, I'm done. You're like, you're not done. Get back on the bike. You're going to fall several more times, but you have to do that to learn. And you have to keep getting up and up and up. And that's where this one bucked me. It was, if I can't do it perfect, why do it? Well, son, because to get perfect, you have to learn to fall a few times to keep getting back up. Got it? Okay, so that's that. The fourth thing you have to do, you have to continually take new risks. So you have to keep pushing yourself further and further. You have to push yourself turning then, and maybe going up driveways. As you get better and better, especially boys, we start jumping ramps, and we jump curves, and we do stuff like that. You're always pushing yourself more and more. Ryan was going to say something back there. Ryan's a skateboarder, so I don't know what you were doing with that, because a skateboard would kill me, so I just tried not to learn that one. So you have to take new risks constantly. And the last thing I would say is this. You have to trust that your brain figures it out, and that it will actually rewire itself to bring you about success. And this is why I remember telling my son when I was teaching him was, you just keep doing this, and every time you do this, your brain is figuring it out. And even though you're falling, even though you're failing here, your brain's taking lessons from that, and it's rewiring itself. And eventually you'll start riding, and you'll just keep going because your brain figures it out. And that's really how bike riding is taught, is you do these other things, and eventually your brain just goes, I've got it clicked, and okay, now I know what it's doing. And it figures out the balancing, and it can go, okay? The reason I tell you that is this. I think spiritual growth is very similar to that. It's very similar to riding a bike. It has the same principles we can learn from it. Let me just explain these to you quickly. And I'm just kind of giving you a broad view today because it's kind of an introductory sermon. And we'll talk more about these things down the road. But the first thing is this. You have to put your life in God's hands. The first thing you have to do is you have to trust His intentions are good for you. So the things He tells you about how to live your life and what His expectations are for you and what things will hurt you and what things will be good for you and healthy for you, you have to have a trust from the start that God has good intentions for me. That the things He's telling me are not to take me away from experiencing joy or happiness or things like that. That He's telling me these things because He truly loves me and He wants to benefit me. And so that's the first thing that you have to get right, which is if I'm going to grow spiritually, I have to trust Him. And I have to put my life in His hands and go, God, I'm yours. Would you mold me? Would you shape me? Would you help me through this process? That's where it starts. Number two, I'd say this. You have to put yourself in the right situation. And what I mean by right situations, you need to be in a healthy church. You need to have some healthy people around you, people that can benefit you in your spiritual walk, people maybe further along on it that can help you through some of the tough times. So you have to put yourself in the right situation. So many people try to live the Christian walk and they're not part of a Christian community, which God designed for you to be a part of, and you go, it's real hard. Do that. Do it on your own. God designed us to be in community. God designed the church for a purpose, and a huge part of that was to have a community around you to walk alongside you. Okay? So you have to put yourself in the right situations. The next thing you have to do, you have to keep getting up every time you fail or fall. Okay? In your spiritual journey, you're going to fail, you're going to fall. That's okay. That's kind of how this thing goes. The reason for that, you're a broken person. You're not perfect, so it's not going to be a consistent growth process in your life when it comes to spiritual walk. You're going to have some times that you grow, and you're going to have some times that you crash, and that's okay. The thing you have to learn is this. When I crash, I got to get back up again. And what I see so often is people crash and just go, I'm just done with it. Put the bike aside, put my spiritual life aside, I'm just going to go. Like, I just failed, and I shouldn't have failed. No. Failure's part of this. It's messy. It's just part of it. I just had, Crud, I just lost your name when I'm on stage. Right here. Yes. No, not Phil. Linda, sorry, okay. I just had Linda brought something to my attention, which is we take communion here, and I can bring this in right here. We take communion here on Sundays. And some people don't take it, and the reason I think they don't take it, and Linda was thinking too, some people don't take it because they go, I had a bad week, and I'm unworthy to take communion this week. Like, I really messed up this week. That's not why you take communion. Okay, you take communion and remember how much God loves you, and you take communion and remember God's grace. And so when you've had a bad week, one of the greatest things you can do is come back to the communion table and take communion and remember that Jesus Christ died for you, so you can have his grace that covers your sin and covers your failures, and you got a new shot. You got a new start. It's one of the greatest things you can do in your darkest times is go take communion as a follower of Jesus Christ. And so a lot of times what we do is when we fall and we fail, we distance ourselves from God, and we have to learn, no, I got to get back on the bike. I got to get back on my journey with him. The fourth thing I would tell you is this. You got to keep taking new risks. This is where mature Christians get in trouble. They stop expanding themselves. They stop stretching themselves. Often you hear me say this to some of you. I need to stretch you. And you're like, what do you mean I need to stretch you? And I'll tell you, I need to get you to do something you're uncomfortable with because it helps you grow. So you need to stretch yourself. You need to do some things you're not comfortable with so you continue to grow. And as Christians, if we're not doing that regularly, what happens is you get apathetic. Okay? You just get apathetic in your spiritual life and you stop growing and you just stagnate. And so you have to stretch yourself. You have to keep trying new things and taking new risks. And the last thing I would tell you is this. You have to trust that God will rewire your brain and that your spiritual growth and success will start to happen as God reorders things in your mind. And that's a faith thing that you just trust. And so through all the failures and the successes and the ups and downs, what you're always hoping for is when you can look back on your life, you can kind of see just a trajectory where it's kind of going up. But you still have all these ups and downs, but you're seeing maybe my downs aren't as down as they once were. And maybe I'm having more ups than I used to have. And God starts to reorder your mind and rewire it to start thinking the way he wants it to think, to start pursuing the things he wants it to pursue. And as you grow, that becomes more and more that way, and you start to ride the bike, and eventually you're not thinking about it anymore. As a Christian now for 28 years, I'm at a point now where my natural tendencies are more Christ-like than they are non-Christ-like, okay? But for a lot of years, I'd say my natural tendencies were less Christ-like, and I still have things that go on in my head that are not Christ-like because that's my natural tendencies that God still has to reorder and rework in my head, that he's transforming me little by little in those areas. But it's a work in progress that has all happened. But I trust, as I look back and I can see it, that God does reorder how your brain works and how you think about things and how you pursue things and what your thought processes are, because he rewires your brain. So here's the thing. It is not a clear-cut process. It's not completely defined. It is messy. And you will have failures and you will have hurts through your process of spiritual growth. But over time, it works. And growth happens if you continue to pursue your relationship with Jesus Christ. So over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking about some of the keys to add to your life that will help you create the right environment that allows God to grow you through this messy process of spiritual growth. Because the end goal is to get here in Romans chapter 2. We read this one a lot. But this is the end goal we want you to get to as followers of Christ, where it says this. Don't copy the customs and behaviors of this world, but let God do what? Let God transform. Let God do that. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you what? Think. Changing, rewiring how you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. And that's where we all want to get to, is where we go, I know what God wants me to do. If I could know that every day, that would be wonderful. Unfortunately, I don't know that half the days of my life. But that's where we want to get to, is that point. And here's the thing, if that's what your goal is, if you would love to have that scripture describe you as well, over the next several weeks, I think we're going to help you get there and get some healthy things in your life that for you as a unique individual will help you grow and will help you get spiritually mature. Let's pray. Heavenly Father,